Hard to tell if it's just the summer heat, or the countless metric tons of CO2 my worthless binging has dumped into the atmosphere, but either way, the anime season's burning up. If you're new here, welcome! You're looking at the freshest takes on the freshest anime of summer 2024 with your boy, Clinical Depression. Yeah, that is definitely not my style, but I'm really pumping the gas pretty hard in this video and I haven't even gotten into how I picked my lineup. Clearly Trash is off his meds again, so let's remedy this with copious amounts of anime. And with a quick switch from third to first person, that I did with my usual method. By decoding the seemingly random syllables the corpse of Joe Biden spat out during the first US presidential debate, and whichever ended up in the ensuing DNC apology tour, were my winners. I don't really have the mental fortitude to deal with the collapse of democracy in the Western Hemisphere right now, so let's just say I got a hell of a lineup and call it there. The strongest magician in the Demon Lord's army was a human starts off the season with the usual OP Isekai protag bullshit. Predicting the future of every otaku, My Wife Has No Emotion is about a guy marrying a robot. Shy's second season is back to compete head-to-head with My Hero Academia. The Ossan Newbie Adventurer is yet another in a long line of Title is the Plot series, reminding me just how out of ideas the light novel industry is. Then again, peak anime is back to swiftly get called overrated with Oshi no Ko's second season. The tired rom-com trope of mismatched classmates hooking up is back in full swing, with Alya sometimes hides her feelings in Russian. I parry everything? More like I wish I could parry these bland OP protag adaptations, am I right? Pseudo-harem will have you saying I can't believe it's not a mental illness, as a girl pretends to fall in love with her crush by acting out different personalities. Another OP isekai anime in Failure Frame, but this time the dude only uses low-level spells. Femboy's already broke into the mainstream, but my cross-dressing senpai breaks the mold by being straight, I guess. What if Dungeons works like a corporation? Dungeon People has the answer, but my guess is crushing capitalism. Quality Assurance in Another World sounds like an isekai, but you'd only be half right. I almost forgot that isekai is like an actual genre outside of just OP protags, but Dahlia in Bloom reminds me that there's other things to do in another world. Yeah, honestly, if there's a group I would have expected to get isekai'd, it would be the Suicide Squad in Suicide Squad Isekai. Real original naming there. Hey, in another unexpected twist, Nobody's way up to an exploration hero is an OP protag thing, but in a fantasy version of our world, isn't that neat? My dear friend Nokotan swoops in to drop the hottest meme potential since Bocchi the Rock, with Nichijou-esque comedy. From Zero to Hero, Wisteria Wand and Sword is another underdog fantasy story where swords trump magic. Hey, the long-awaited second season of Tower of God is back to remind us that Korea does anime tropes better than Japan these days. Usually just leaving your stream on gets you a Twitch ban, but VTuber Legends somehow launches an entire anime with that premise. Okay, well, because we can't find any more gimmicks to milk for Isekai, A Journey Through Another World has a dude raising some kids while he's there. Fuck it, content creation is a genre in itself now, so let's milk it some more with Mayonaka Punch. Wow, 2 whole anime from 2020 making their return? Let's hope that's the only thing coming back from that god-awful year. But Our Last Crusade or The Rise of a New World second season finally drops. And lastly, global warming kicks in just in time to kick off Atri, My Dear Moments. That's certainly a wall of isekai staring me down since I've been away from it for the past few seasons, but let's not put it off anymore and get on into it. First up is the strongest magician in the Demon Lord's army was a human. So a dude dies and is reincarnated into a fantasy world, get used to hearing that this video, where he gets stupidly good at magic. Only one problem. He's been living in the demon territory, raised by a respected demon, and him being a human might not sit too well with most of the others. So he's hiding that fact while being one of the top brass in the war against humankind. So how does this stack up? A little rough around the edges. The setup is a bit straightforward and it hits the ground running in that aspect, though how it drops plot points haphazardly feels like this series can't really decide what it wants to do. Like, this dude's kept this secret for 20 some years, and then he's caught within the first 5 minutes of the first episode. But don't worry about that, because we're moving on already. Are we gonna see some inner turmoil or reason why this dude is fine fighting humans? Not really, and that was the first question that came to mind when I saw this premise. There's just this massive shrug when it comes to getting this anime off the ground. And my main impression is it wants to settle into the main stride of the story without doing the hard part of setting it up. That's a disappointment. Also, it just reeks of weak-ass storytelling by having lazy narration explain pretty much everything, which is entirely standard for these sort of anime. So how does it look at least? Well, it's certainly a Studio ACAP production, so expect some ugly CG to cut corners and otherwise stiff animation. Gotta love these zooms on freeze frames or just looping action poses, but at least there's some attention to the art. In stills, it looks passable, if you can actually tell what's going on in some of these scenes because they're dark as hell. So yeah, not a great start to an already packed fantasy season. Speaking of lowered expectations, My Wife Has No Emotion is next. I'm not entirely sure what I was expecting from the name, but robot certainly wasn't it. I guess it's better than an emotionally distant woman who gets oohed by the animators at least. Anyway, this one's about a guy who needed a housekeeper, got a robot, and decided to take things a step further by spending more time with her than just using her for her free labor. Thus begins a heartwarming relationship of a man and his bot, as they go on picnics and such, and maybe learn how to love together. That's a weird premise, but not entirely unexplored territory. But as a rom-com rather than political commentary, that's what actually gives this a creative edge. Besides, I'm down for some sci-fi in the fantasy hellscape that is modern anime. As for what this offers, it's mixing a lot of styles, and that juxtaposition reinforces the message that this dude is breaking the norm to date what even he describes as an appliance. As for the comedy in this rom-com, it's not over the top, but still manages to get a chuckle through excellent timing. Honestly, this is a series that could go either way depending on how deep it wants to dive into its premise, and either result won't make for a boring experience, as the awkward romance and deadpan humor make for a good combination. Tezuka Productions is handling this adaptation, and that's a studio that's very hit or miss. Luckily, we're dealing with the director from Adachi and Shimamura, someone who has a competent understanding of how to tell a story visually, and the style here is certainly a strange mix. Like, the animation is pretty solid, even harkening back to some classic animation techniques, but the character designs are going to be love it or hate it for many viewers. As for me, I think they have some charm, and at least give this series a visual identity. Honestly, a pretty nice surprise this season, and I'm looking forward to more. Next is the second season of Shy, a series I had some mixed feelings on when the first season dropped back in fall of 2023. But essentially, I found the story that was presented a bit lackluster, but really enjoyed the characters, themes, and motives. So the thing I'm keeping an eye out for this season is if this can step up in the plot department, with the whole evil organization thing being more impactful than just mattering in the last few episodes. Does this first episode at least hint that it's moving in that direction? Well, that's complicated. First episodes usually need to settle the audience back into the show before kicking off the plot, but this still managed to show where many of the cast are mentally after the events of the previous outing, which works as a decent reintroduction, as it shows some reflecting and improving. That gives me high hopes that we'll see this become the anime I know it can be, rather than just the glimpses from last. It's fun to joke about this in My Hero Academia since, well, they're both takes on Western superheroes, but that's where the similarities end. Shy isn't a superhero action show, it's more of a character-driven drama. And while there are many superhero franchises that delve into that here in the West, it's nice seeing a non-Western take on the notions of heroism and responsibility, so I'm at least reinvested in where this is going after the first episode. Yeah, we're just not getting away from OP pro tags anytime soon, and the Ossan Newbie Adventurer is certainly another. So a guy who's always wanted to be an adventurer but got a late start after turning 30 was power leveled by a party of badasses until he became the most badass of all. So what are we doing? We're following this dude on his journey to prove himself, because no one trusts this dude who came up out of the blue after hanging out with a bunch of powerhouses. In practice, it's basically what you would expect. A competently put together anime adaptation that's really middle of the road. It has all the bog standard fantasy trappings of a guild, letter rankings for level of skill, and mostly misses in terms of jokes, because all of these also have to be a comedy. And that's on top of the random ecchi moments, because those are the jingling keys that keep the audience paying attention. Anyway, while it sounds like I might be mostly down on this, I'm mostly just numb to it. The first episode is entirely set up, but does a good job at it, I guess, while also making a main character who's not insufferable. A low bar to be sure, but many have tripped over it. As for the art and animation, it's fairly detailed, though not dynamic, meaning it looks nice in stills at least. That's to be expected, honestly, as the studio here has a tenuous track record of producing mostly okay productions. But hey, at least it gave us a nostalgia-inducing throwback theme song, right? I don't really know what else to say. It's an OP Pro Tag fantasy series, so you basically know what this is all about. It really comes down to if you like what little seasonings they added to this dish. And spoiler alert, it's not much. So, is Oshi no Ko's second season gonna live up to the hype? Or well, if they're gonna beat the incest allegations at least. But it's finally here, and last season left off on a fairly high note, as Aqua tracks down the person behind his mother's murder. Will we get answers this season? Probably not, since the manga is still ongoing. But there are certainly a lot of expectations on this anime, as when the last season hit, it quickly smashed its way to the top of all-time charts, while facing some backlash for being overrated. Where am I at on that? Well, firmly in this one's corner, because I was down for the murder mystery mixed with entertainment industry drama. A lot about Oshi no Ko stands out, and I'm here to see if this season stacks up. So does it? I mean, you're not gonna get as strong of an opening episode as last season. That literally had a theatrical release. But this one certainly does kick things off pretty well, showing as much love for the source material as before, with fantastic art, visuals, and creating an overall impactful return. If you loved how visual the story was last season, you'll be pleased to hear that it keeps that style, which is great news, because that's what gave this a creative edge in the first place. As for the story, it jumps right back into where we left off, with enough gentle reminders of what's happened thus far. So really, a solid return for a continuing anime that makes me excited to see what comes next. Romance is hitting pretty hard this season, probably to clap back against all the fantasy, and we're looking at Alya sometimes hides her feelings in Russian next. So, we know this setup, a beautiful girl and average guy sitting next to each other, and flirt quite a bit. The gimmick here is the girl is half Russian and speaks her mind in that language unfiltered, with the expectation that no one around her can understand. Except, the dude does, because he picked up Russian as a kid. That's probably not foreshadowing. Teasing and banter ensue, and as they go back and forth, a romance slowly builds. Yeah, this is a pretty cliche setup, but it works. Cliche or not, the actual execution is what matters, and what we have here is a pretty good execution. There's a great antagonistic relationship on the surface, creating solid banter, meaning the comedy is on point. While Alya fits the archetype of a tsundere, I genuinely enjoyed how expressive she is. Like, she's standoffish, but has a teasing and cute side to her, showing she's not just all soon or dare. So, interesting characters that have good chemistry and play well off one another makes for a strong foundation for a romance series. And hey, the gimmick for this one isn't too bad, as it gives some diversity to the actual jokes, while not relying on it to carry the whole show. Love it. As for the animation, good to see you again, Dogo Kobo. I see you're not bringing your A game here, which is crazy, considering the people working on this, but that doesn't mean the show looks bad. It's well animated, the art is detailed, and the designs pull off cute and serious without a drastic shift in style, making for a wonderfully cohesive series. Yeah, I don't really foresee any issues cropping up on this anime, unless there is some serious crunch behind the scenes and we just haven't seen that yet. Which means it's a pretty safe bet for a good romance anime this season. So, sign me up. Really wish I could have stayed away longer, but the call of OP Pro Tag Fantasy is just too strong to resist, and we're looking at I Parry Everything next. So a guy spent years training in the mountains to become an adventurer, only to hone a skill he saw as pretty much worthless, and then seems to thwart an assassination attempt on his kingdom's princess out of nowhere, using said worthless skill. Great. Now he's wrapped up in this kingdom's drama with his amazing ability to parry everything thrown at him. If you're like me, you're probably tired of the OP Pro Tag schlock pouring out of Japan lately, but this one's at least a competent outing. It establishes this dude's character, motives, and life fairly well, and creates a strong connection between him and the princess he's looking after, making this not such a straightforward narrative that flounders looking for stuff for the cast to do. So ultimately, it's intriguing enough to keep my attention, solid action, and enough story to hook the audience for the first outing. Rare combo. OLM is behind this, which, if you're unfamiliar, they're the studio behind Odd Taxi, Apothecary Diaries, and Komi Can't Communicate, which somehow shows here. The staff have a solid history of working on some big projects in these specific roles, so there's a lot to be excited for. The animation is fairly nice, but the art and cinematography give this an edge where most fall flat, bringing this fantasy world it's set into life. Of the OP Pro Tag fantasy shows I've looked at thus far, this is probably doing the best for summer. I'm starting to sense a pattern of bland fantasy followed by a rom-com, and pseudo-harem steps in to fill that role. Mostly, Anyway, our main dude wants to be popular with the ladies, but has zero experience in game. Luckily, his cute underclassman wants to help him out by giving him some practice with different types of girls, while flexing her acting skills by making a harem of one. Can't tell if that's sweet or creepy, honestly. So, while she is acting, she's still definitely crushing on this dude, but will he manage to notice? Judging by the tags, not likely. What we get is a mostly average high school slice of life with very light comedy. It seems to be more friendship, bordering on romantic tensions, despite all the flirting, with them using this experience to further their acting skills, because they're in the drama club. But I don't know, it definitely could have worked out the setup phase a bit better. The two leads aren't meshing super well from the start, and the premise is just dropped on us out of nowhere. Like, why does she have a crush on him? Not really explained. Dude shows her to the drama club and bam, she's like his bestie. Luckily, it makes up with that random start with some genuinely cute moments. The humor is varied, mostly focusing on gags based on the acting premise, keeping it from getting stale with a breakneck pace. As for the animation, the studio here is the same one behind Jashin-chan Dropkick, and it seems to share a similar aesthetic to that, being a fairly average slice-of-life look, minus the hyper-violence of course. The series doesn't look pretty or really even pop, but it does get the job done, if not for the character designs that look off some of the time. I may be sounding kinda hard on this series, but it's because I think it has a lot of potential, and while the first episode is cute, it was still underwhelming. However, it's worth a shot if you're feeling light on slice of life. God damn it, back to OP Isekai with failure frame. I became the strongest and annihilated everything with low-level spells. Title is the plot synopsis, as usual, but basically, this is Arifureta at home. Dude and his entire class gets summoned to another world on a bus trip, where he alone gets a useless skill and stats. Or not. So, since the dude has low stats and his class just doesn't give a flying fuck about him, the goddess who summoned him banishes him to a dungeon because, well, he could hold the party back, I guess. And that's where he discovers just how OP he is with the right mindset. Now he's climbing his way out for sweet revenge. Yeah, this is just straight up Arifureta. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. This anime lays it on entirely too thick that this main dude was abused as a child, being an outsider in his own class, and essentially setting him up to be the edgy loner ready for revenge before he even gets isekai'd. Why this works in other anime is the element of betrayal, and this goes to so many lengths to set that up as just another in a long line of shit that's already happened to this guy. So why should I care? The cast are all cliches because they barely matter at this stage in the story, and the main dude is just your typical outcast. Everything about this was about as flippant as you'd expect with zero stakes because the series wants to race headlong into the quote-unquote cool shit. So that left me with a very empty impression. It's all generic without any subversion because it's using other series as a template. The studio behind this is 7 Arcs. They have a somewhat okay track record, I guess. For action, their latest was Chained Soldier, which the action was probably the better part of that series. Not that any of it was good. So the animation here is at least serviceable, if not at least decently done in the first episode to give you a good impression. Look, it's not impressive, but it at least looks nice and puts some effort into some interesting shots, which I'll take for this anime considering everything else I've bitched about thus far. You want a generic-ass revenge isekai plot? This'll cover you until you binge Arifureta again. Rom-coms have been the highlight of this season thus far, and I'm pinning my hopes on my cross-dressing senpai. Oh, it's a Project Number 9 production? God damn it. Anyway, we know how this goes. A girl falls for her cute senpai at school, only to learn the not-so-harsh truth and extremely open secret that this senpai is actually a boy who dresses like a girl. That's what we call a Yuri fake out in the industry. But fear not, because she has an open mind and is willing to give love a chance. Too bad he doesn't agree off the bat. Thus begins our story of a girl trying to win a boy's heart. Honestly, this has a lot of topics it wants to address, and I don't have any doubt that it will. Societal expectations, gender roles, sexual identity, and attraction are the obvious ones, of course. But I really appreciate the sincerity it tackled them in the first episode. Not only is the main character defying cultural expectations, but even the dude's best friend is straight up in denial that he has feelings for his best pal. What I really liked is that cross-dressing isn't a joke in this anime. And that's fairly rare. There's even subtlety in how they're using an actual male voice actor for our lead boy. You know, instead of a female one, like they normally would for these type of characters. Showing this series wants to address these complex topics sincerely. As for the animation, it's one of my least favorite studios here, so Project Number 9 does mostly competent work, though everything they produce feels samey as hell, and they tend to tackle the gimmicky romances that are always out, so I'm fairly confident in what we're about to get on that front. That being a series with middling animation, but almost no style or anything of note to really elevate the story being told. Oh, you like those chibi moments? Guess what? That's what we call cutting corners. So I think this one has a lot of promise, especially for a more complex romance story involving multiple parties. But whether I found that it stuck that landing is gonna be up to my season review. So see you back in a few months. Alright, back to the fantasy grind with dungeon people. A thief goes searching for her missing father in an unexplored dungeon, only to bump into the master of the place after accidentally destroying a wall, and given a job managing its monsters as the new caretaker. That sounds like a challenge. But will this bring her any closer to finding her father? Can't imagine, unless the dude's buried 6 feet under in the bottom layer. But who am I to judge? The vibes I'm getting are a lighter, slice of life sort of delicious in dungeon, where it's looking at the classic tropes of fantasy and exploring them in a different lens, like the city sim aspect. But even if the story has a somewhat similar setup, the world building isn't nearly as strong. Now, that doesn't mean that this is inferior, just different in that regard, as what we get is still a pretty enjoyable comedy adventure series. A dark twist hasn't hit, so can't say if it's the same as Delicious in Dungeon in that regard. And in terms of comedy, it does a pretty nice job of setting up our expectations of a typical fantasy sort of deal, and then knocking them over with the whole dungeon management aspect. And that's when the stage play of evil monsters and menacing dungeon crumble, and our main girl gets a literal glimpse behind the scenes. And while not having me in stitches, it does still have its charm. Oh hey look, OLM's second outing this season, and the art director's from Odd Taxi, a series I praised for its style. And while this one does have a pretty simplistic one, there's definitely effort here. How things move and their color choices elevate the scenes in this series, which makes that simplistic style a choice in selling the more laid-back mood. This is meant to convey a storybook sort of vibe, and I think it's doing a pretty good job of it. If you're looking for a lighter fantasy affair, this is probably right up your alley. Look, if I can't get away from fantasy, I'll at least take some twists on the genre, and quality assurance in another world probably strikes you as an isekai with an OP protag sort of affair, as an average village girl gets saved by a random adventurer from dragons, and vows to follow him on his journey to fix issues plaguing the world. However, things don't seem quite right, as there's a massive secret that he's keeping that could change her very existence. What does that entail? Well, it's not much of a secret to the audience, but dude is a debugger working on fixing the problems of the latest VR MMO, meaning she's just an NPC, and he's trapped in this world unable to log out. Now, before you go ahead and draw that connection, this isn't like SAO or anything. It's very much a character-driven fantasy series that adds layers about how actual players would be perceived by the NPCs around them, and also how living through the awful crap that games do put you through kinda casually, especially in an immersive setting like VR, could, maybe leave some mental scars. So it's fairly interesting in that regard, because this is kinda psychological. Personally, I like the style for this series, though I'm not gonna fault people who don't. The rougher, thick line work works for me personally, and I kind of enjoy the cartoonish style, as sort of speaks to the nature of the game this takes place in. That's not to say I'm trying to excuse bad art. It's clearly intentional as the animation and cinematography still hold up. It's also not flashy, but it's certainly trying, and that I appreciate in this day and age, where most productions have given up on a unique vibe. In terms of a subversive fantasy, it's not outstanding, but it's certainly better than the half-dozen isekais and OP protags I'm looking at this season. So if you're looking for something with a bit more substance, this is worth a look. Hey, it's time for my usual fake out, where I tease that there might be an ad break here, unless you're one of the few left on the PC Master Race with an ad blocker, or have YouTube Premium, or just got lucky and didn't get an ad. I definitely don't do these to pad out my runtime or cover up the cuts in my voiceover. Damn. Even after the break, I still can't get away from fantasy? Well, Dahlia and Bloom is next. We're dealing with another isekai, but instead of going to a new world with amazing powers to save it, Dahlia is reborn as a magic toolmaker's daughter, loves the line of work, and is engaged to her father's apprentice, but has tragedy strike when her father passes away, and dude breaks off their engagement because he's in love with somebody else. Now she's gonna make her own company to inject some competition into this monopoly. Yeah, I'm getting some early parts of Ascendance of a Bookworm vibes off that description, and that's not too far off. This is very much a slice of life about Dahlia creating magic tools, and essentially making up for her wasted modern life. It also threads a line where she has memories of her past life, but doesn't share the same personality necessarily, as she is still a kid in the first episode and very much acts like one. So yeah, this is a very different isekai experience, and one that's honestly a breath of fresh air, as I'm down for the world building, and seeing a story about a person finding their own way is a second chance. Plus, the characters are just plain enjoyable. We're dealing with two studios on this, one who did the anime adaptation of Why Raeliana Ended Up at the Duke's Mansion, and also S-Rank Musume. Both series I said had questionable animation in the past, but ultimately turned out decent due to their direction, and I'm seeing the makings of that here. Like, there is very clearly ambition in the direction, but whether it's crunch or something else that's causing them to rely on CG in places to sell that, gives the end product a budget feel. And that's kind of a shame, because this has a lot of potential to be a really captivating anime. Good animation isn't necessarily a requirement for that, and I am intrigued to see where this is going, so I'll follow it for sure. Oh, scratch that. It's isekai I can't get away from. And we're looking at DC Comics' foray into the isekai genre with the supervillain team voted most likely to get killed in action by Amanda Waller. Suicide Squad Isekai. Yeah, that title alone basically says the whole premise, but this is the Suicide Squad in a fantasy world trying to get back home before the bombs in their heads explode. I mean, the plot is a bit more complex than that, but those are details and this is a first impression. What we got is honestly a little uncanny of an experience. Now, I'm not the most familiar with DC Comics, but I know a bit about Suicide Squad, and Amanda Waller seems dubiously in character here, while Harley is the obvious show stealer. It plays a bit fast and loose in the first episode, mostly to deliver what you're looking for right away, that being awesome fights and the characters in a fantasy world. And does that work? Well, if you're not a diehard fan of Suicide Squad, apologies to all three of you, but still enjoy these characters from their comics, there's definitely something here. The plot does come together and is enough reason for the cool shit to exist, so I'm here for it. Studio Wit did an overall decent job on this. The animation and direction are all on point, creating a visually engaging and energetic experience that captures your attention. Some fights do feel a bit strange, as they're definitely not animated like anime. They're wide and slow for one, honestly making me question if these were drawn over live action choreography. For what could have been a fairly easy cash grab that writes itself, there's definitely some effort put in here. But that's not too surprising considering these sort of crossovers tend to go pretty big, so check it out if you're into anime and DC Comics. And Nobody's Way Up to Exploration Hero isn't your typical fantasy series, as it's set in modern day Japan with magic and shit. Our boy works part-time as a dungeon delver where one day, he's blessed by RN Jesus, and the gacha gods all smile upon him with an SS tier waifu to fight by his side, which means our Zero just went to hero status so he can challenge deeper floors, and maybe catch the eye of his crush in the process. The execution here is mostly comedy, and not a great one at that. Hell, his first dilemma is to sell his rare monster card he just got for what amounts to about $6 million US. Bro, just take that money and fucking retire as a teenager. Invest that shit in the stock market and never work a day in your life. What's wrong with you? Okay, so on paper, I do get the motivation, but seeing it play out, this anime is incredibly aimless. As for world building, it's in fucking shambles. Like, this parallel version of Japan follows video game logic? Why? Overall, I'm just left with a ton of questions, so not a great introduction to this series. Because this is a slice of life main character in an action setting and neither really mesh, he barely has a reason to do all this dangerous crap, and that really guts the series. The setting is therefore nerfed to accommodate an uninspired lead. For the animation, it's pretty bad. Not even in an interesting way to talk about. It's like they took an entirely slice of life approach to this, probably because it's a comedy, and yeah, it is kind of a slice of life too, but you also do action in it, and that's animated like it's slice of life too. So slow, clunky, and not at all interesting. The monsters are generic looking and toothless, models fluctuate in scale and detail, creating an overall disjointed experience, mostly playing up encounters for gags, all on top of the samey environments and colors. It's grays and browns all the way down. I was hoping for something more substantive, but all I ended up with was waifu gacha trash. Yeah, there's better fantasy and comedy than this, so probably not worth picking up, especially in this season. The hype is officially here with My Dear Friend Nokotan, and it had the internet ablaze because it looked like an absolutely batshit insane comedy series. Haven't had one of those in a while. Yeah, the story is barely relevant in these sort of deals, but a girl who appears to be a perfect student actually has a dark secret that she used to be a delinquent. But stranger yet is this weird deer girl who shows up at her school and causes chaos in her life, while possibly bringing our girl's dark past to light. That said, this is our latest entry into the cute girls doing a comedy thing, but this is still pretty damn crazy, where the humor is to just keep you second guessing every step of the way, with absolute insanity pouring out every time it sets up a punchline. We have dark humor, fourth wall breaks, visual gags, and over-the-top zaniness too. It's reminiscent of something like Nichijou honestly, though not as committed to the comedy animated like action bit. Overall, a pretty packed package delivering solid laughs throughout, with just enough story to get you invested in the characters. That said, it does require a love of the absurd, and I'm down for the vibe here. Animation is less interesting to talk about, not because it's poorly animated or anything. It has a solid grasp of timing, the style is cute and energetic, and the 3D deer models are uncanny enough to be a punchline in their own right, but it definitely stays in its own lane for style. It knows what it's going for and nails it pretty hard, which is appreciated sometimes. If you're looking for a top tier comedy, especially one that's completely crazy, this is definitely worth a look. Okay, back into fantasy because there's literally no escape from industry trends. Wisteria Wand and Sword is about a guy who promised his childhood friend that he would become the best magician of all. Too bad he sucks and can't even use basic spells. I guess he'll just have to go beat a bunch of monsters to prove himself to everyone else at magic school. Yeah, that's an awfully generic premise, but the execution here is better than you would expect. The series establishes this dude's drive early on and makes him relatable enough that you're invested in his struggle. Magic is basically the pinnacle of strength in this setting, so having no talent in magic makes people look down on him. Yeah, sounds like Mashal, but this isn't your typical sort of shonen battle series, as the first episode is incredibly character focused. Yeah, dude's pretty damn strong, but not absurdly so. The lore of this world is pretty damn interesting too, where why this dude wants to be a top tier mage isn't just for prestige, but because they're literally supporting the way of life of this world with their magic, and his childhood friend is already at that point. Yeah, she's one of the top mages. Animation here is what puts this a step above, as it's not just visually striking, but incredibly fluid, with strong cinematography that pulls viewers into the experience. Action is fast-paced and clean, not to mention incredibly hype-inducing. There's an attention to detail in framing shots to keep them interesting while reinforcing the narrative. Not much else to say here. If you're looking for a strong contender for a fantasy series, this one's more your traditional affair and stands ahead above its competition this season. Wow, Tower of God was confirmed for a season 2 fucking ages ago, but it's seriously been 4 years since we got the first? If you're unfamiliar with the plot here, Bam entered the legendary tower to chase after his friend, where he got wrapped up in the politics and power struggle of climbing it. That's pretty much it. This season is basically the actual start of the climb, because just entering the tower required a certain level of skill and such, so a tournament and training arc weeded out our non-main characters. In light of his friend's betrayal at the end of the last season, what's in store for this one? Well, basically a soft reset on the series, as Bam took some time off to train and toughen up a bit. So we're introduced to a new character who's our point of view for the time being. Someone who's failed the tower before and can't get past the 20th floor, which seems sorta silly to backtrack like this. However, it works as a good reintroduction to the series, especially after a 4-year gap. Though it's not exactly getting me excited for the next steps in the story, as it comes across as though it lost the plot. We're dealing with a new studio and that sorta shows. Not that the original studio was amazing, but they certainly put work in on the first season. This feels like a pretty standard looking anime, so there's been a definite decline in quality, cheapening the impact quite a bit. The action at least feels mostly well done, so there's that. If you were looking forward to the second season, this is a bit of a letdown, but not nearly as bad as some season 2s have fallen. Let's see if we can avoid the ban ourselves despite looking at VTuber legend next. So a former wage slave quits her day job and signs up to be a VTuber idol, but her persona's too bland to garner a following. But then, one fateful day when she thinks she cut her stream, she gets drunk and watches some other VTuber content, cracking jokes and Yuri baiting while live. And not only did her fans eat up that crude commentary, she went viral in the process. So, smelling money, her manager gives her the go-ahead to get wasted for fun and profit. So this is a pretty similar setup to voice actor Radio from last season, but rather than damn near losing her career, our girl realizes that just about every VTuber out there is an ADHD-riddled ball of chaos, and everyone's been waiting for her to break character for ages now. This is honestly one of the most realistic depictions of VTubers I've seen thus far, so yeah, we're dealing with a comedy here. and the main gag is hammering the gap between reality and expectations, mostly with a big reliance on crude jokes to reinforce that. It's kinda hard to tell what's virtual in this series and what's literal, since our main girl seems to dress and look exactly like her avatar, while sitting at her computer streaming video games, or taking out the trash. And that raises some questions like, does she just stream in full cosplay? But seeing some ice princess downing beers while streaming is still pretty damn comical. Now, whether that can carry a whole show is yet to be seen. What I will say though is this does capture the essence of VTuber culture, so if you like that aspect of VTubers, you'll feel right at home. Animation is pretty pointless to talk about. It has a very plain style, using a lot of chibi to sell the cute as well as jokes, while sticking actual VTuber models in streams. It's not terribly impressive, but it does fit the tone the show is going for. Obviously there's better comedies out this season, but this one isn't too bad. And here I am, dragged one last time back into the isekai hellscape. A journey through another world, raising kids while adventuring is next, where a guy accidentally dies and God has to make it up to him by giving him a life in a new world. But this God kind of sucks at his job, and sends our boy to a dangerous forest where he bumps into two kids and decides to raise them because, why the fuck not? This is a more slice of life sort of isekai, but unlike Dahlia and Bloom, this one still packs a ton of the usual tropes. Still has the game stats crap, OP protag, though the kids are stronger for gag reasons, and the usual excuse for reincarnation, but it's definitely not taking itself super seriously, so I can cut us some slack. This is mostly about cute fluff with the kids and their adoptive father, and in that regard, it's okay. Art and animation here are pretty bad. Like, the models don't look great, but it's not distractingly so. It's mostly a milquetoast sort of adaptation where they focused on a few things to make it bearable to watch, namely the characters' faces because they're meant to be cute and distracting. I'm not a massive fan of this, if you couldn't tell, because despite being a more laid-back isekai, it's still flirting with the usual isekai trappings, which makes me wonder why bother with this in the first place. But there are still people who are fans of this sort of show, and if you like laid-back isekai, this is probably for you. The online content mill has even affected anime with Mayonaka Punch. A former YouTuber teams up with a vampire to make a more popular YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. So the setup here is fairly realistic and creates a pretty compelling narrative for why our main girl wants to make a successful channel. It's not just about revenge for getting kicked out of her current group, but trying to relive what she had before the breakup. And yeah, it's not a great look for her to overcome, considering she kicked her friends' asses on livestream and is getting cancelled for it. Definitely an uphill battle here with a rough, narcissistic protagonist. So how does a vampire fit into that mess? She's interested because the girl appeared in her dreams and she wants to drink her blood. Obviously she has to get closer to her, right? And by saving her after a fateful encounter, you've got a reason for these two to work together. Yeah, the Yuri subtext is bordering on plain text at this point. This series does a great job at setting up the characters and their motivations though. The actual comedy is pretty much on point, used as ways to break the tension for the plot. So while this is a comedy series, there's a definite sense that there's a story to be told, and not just an excuse for gags. PA Works is the studio here, and this turned out pretty damn well from a visual standpoint. The way negativity online is shown, how the camera frames scenes, and the actual animation are all really nicely done, creating an engaging watch. I'm definitely liking their approach, especially for a series where the main character starts off in such a negative light. This anime has a lot going for it, and how well it follows through on these themes will make or break it, so I'm interested in seeing where it goes. Never thought I would say this, but hey, let's revisit 2020 for a bit with the second season of Our Last Crusade. From what I recall, it's been 4 years, cut me some slack. The series had an interesting plot, unique world, and a lot of cool elements I praised, but the execution wasn't as great as it could have been. The first season had pretty slow development, which felt like they weren't really moving the narrative forward in most episodes, and aside from the sci-fi versus magic aspect, which was pretty neat, the romance had legs too in a Romeo and Juliet sense, which added layers to follow. So that's going to be my metric going into this season. Does it actually get to a point? And after watching the first episode, my answer is not really. In fact, it picks up the plot without missing a single beat, which is a bit annoying. Like with Tower of God, your show has been away for 4 years. Usually you want to remind the audience a bit about what happened because most people aren't going to binge the previous season in anticipation for a follow-up they likely forgot about. So yeah, I'll pin the blame for that on this series. No problem. On top of thrusting a side romance and jealousy-spurred rants into this episode for comedic effect, we're left with a pretty poor reintroduction to the series overall. Were you hoping for the same vibes going in? Because you're not getting it. Yeah, Silverlink is returning on this series, but so is another studio to help them out. The majority of the staff on this one are new, including the series composer, director, and animation. That's not a red flag or anything. And while this series looks fine and the animation is just okay, there's a definite lack of impact that the first season had. Like, they really tried in the first few episodes with their cinematography and animation, and this season is lacking on that front. And that's setting aside the noticeable downtick in quality of the art. So yeah, I'm kinda disappointed. Let's brighten our outlook with some post-apocalyptic fun in Atri, My Dear Moments. In the future, when sea levels rise, a guy who got fed up with the city he lives in returns to his childhood home to find that global warming was in fact not bullshit. So the town is mostly underwater. Left with nothing but a boat and a sub, he teams up with a con artist to salvage his grandmother's lab for a supposed treasure, only to discover a mysterious robot girl instead. Yeah, that description gives away pretty much the entire plot for the first episode, so there's not really much to talk about on that front. What I will say is this certainly feels like a visual novel adaptation. The characters are incredibly defined with just a few lines, the ambiance, and the team did a great job adapting the narration into visuals. On top of easily relatable motives and dilemmas, creates an immersive story, so big props there. The big question is, where does it go from here? And that's actually a good thing in this case, because it means I'm interested in the direction the story is headed. Studio Troika is helming this adaptation, and while they have a somewhat mixed bag, the staff here are at least seasoned enough that I expect this to look pretty damn decent. And the director here is the same from Bloomin' to You, a series that had incredibly strong cinegraphic language. That shows here, because the framing and animation make for some really interesting shots. As for the actual animation, it's incredibly solid, but there's not much in terms of style. It's a fairly plain anime look, so you've seen it before, but since it moves well and is presented creatively, it gives an overall great impression. So if you're looking for a more drama-focused anime with a big emphasis on plot, this one's worth checking out. So that's it. We've reached the end of our... Wait, why are we in a cutaway right now? I already did my usual poorly implemented ad break. What gives? Oh, hey Patreon. What is it you got there? Damn, that is certainly a throwback. When the hell was the last time I even did that gag? I doubt any of my viewers even recognize it at this point. So you know what? For you, I'll do it. Why not? Wheel of depravity, turn, turn, turn. Show me the series that I should spurn. I'm regretting my choices already. Plus-sized elf brings your BBW fantasies to life by merging it with your elf fetish. Wow, we didn't have to choose. No, that was a statement. This wasn't a choice I wanted nor even thought about. Anyway, the plot here is an elf comes to the human world because she's sick of her home's bullshit and wants to eat some delicious food, which means she falls in love with our junk food here back on Earth. That leads to her packing on a few pounds and enlists the help of our local massage therapist who's here to help her shed the excess weight. Well, based on the tags, I can think of a few ways this would shake down. So yeah, it's that sort of anime, meaning I've got to censor this shit. And with the 15-minute runtime, you can expect it to be pretty damn horny and light on the story. Basically, the first episode is all you're really gonna get in that department, with maybe a few other characters showing up to vary the eye candy somewhat. And don't get me wrong, that's really the only value this series has. It's tagged comedy and fantasy, but don't be fooled. The jokes basically amount to just breasts popping out, and the fantasy is the elf. That's it. Entirely shallow series. Oh wait, you want me to talk about the animation? Why? It's incredibly basic and simplistic with zero effort. And my research shows the studio behind this only has one other production under their belt, and that's a porno. So yeah, if you're desperate, and you know what I mean by that, sure, but I don't know why you'd waste your time watching this over other material in the first place. Well, that's actually it. We made it through my selection for summer, and while I might have seemed pretty harsh this video, there's at least some potential here. I'm not expecting knockouts for every show, but whether most of these can shape up into decent watches is still on the table, despite the oversaturation of fantasy anime. Anyway, tell me your thoughts down below. What are you most excited for this season? I'd love to hear it. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Autumn Stott, JMonth33A, Lalexis, Pokeflute, Robin DBL, Samuel Chen, Sazi, Tristan, and Vonstrom for their continued support. Thanks for watching.